The first time I noticed something was off, I was alone in my house on a quiet autumn night. The wind outside rattled the window panes, and the moon cast long shadows across the wooden floors. My parents had left for the weekend, visiting my aunt in upstate New York, leaving me, an 18-year-old senior in high school, to watch the house. It wasn't my first time home alone, but that night the house felt different. I was lying on the couch, half watching a horror movie when I heard faint footsteps upstairs. My blood ran cold. My house was old, so it made noises, but these weren't the random creaks of settling wood. These were deliberate, slow footsteps. I muted the TV, heart pounding, and strained to listen. Silence. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe it was the wind or a branch scraping the roof. Then, thump, a single heavy footstep. I bolted upright. Someone was in the house. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling to dial 911, but then I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I called the cops just to find out it was nothing? My parents would kill me for causing a scene over nothing. Summoning my courage, I grabbed the baseball bat my dad kept by the door and crept toward the staircase. I flicked on the hall light and peered up. The second floor was shrouded in darkness. Hello? My voice wavered, and I immediately regretted speaking. If someone was there, I had just given away my position. Silence. I swallowed hard and forced myself up the stairs, step by step, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. When I reached the landing, I turned toward my parents' bedroom, the room where I had heard the noise. The door was open, just a crack. I pushed it open slowly, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty. The closet door stood slightly ajar, my stomach twisted. I stepped inside, took a deep breath, and yanked the closet door open. Nothing. Just my dad's suits and my mom's dresses hanging in the dim light. I let out a shaky breath. Maybe I really had imagined it. Maybe. Slam! The bedroom door slammed shut behind me. I spun around so fast I almost lost my balance. My breath hitched. I was alone in the room, but something had closed that door. I bolted out, nearly tripping as I ran downstairs, my pulse hammering in my ears. I grabbed my keys and ran outside, standing in the middle of my driveway, panting. My breath came out in cold puffs in the crisp autumn air. The house loomed behind me, its dark windows like hollow eyes. I debated calling my parents, but what would I say? I heard a noise. The door shut by itself? It sounded crazy. I was probably just scaring myself. After a few minutes, I mustered the courage to go back inside. I left all the lights on and double-checked every door and window before locking myself in my bedroom. I told myself it was just my imagination, just paranoia from being home alone. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. The next night, things got worse. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to shake the uneasy feeling in my gut. My door was closed, my room dimly lit by my bedside lamp. I told myself I'd sleep with the light on, just this once. Then around 2 a.m., I heard it. A whisper. My whole body went rigid. It was faint, but unmistakable, coming from the hallway. I held my breath, heart hammering. The whispering continued, a soft, unintelligible murmur. It sounded like more than one voice. I slowly reached for my phone, preparing to call 911. Then, my doorknob twisted. Not a casual bump. Not an accidental shift. Someone or something was trying to open my door. I shot up in bed, my breath catching in my throat. The doorknob rattled again, more violently this time. I was frozen. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My brain screamed at me to do something, but I just sat there, paralyzed. Then, silence. The whispering stopped. The doorknob stilled. I didn't move for what felt like hours. I just sat there, clutching my phone with sweaty hands, staring at my bedroom door. Finally, I forced myself to move. I tiptoed toward the door and pressed my ear against it. Nothing. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I turned the knob and yanked the door open. The hallway was empty, but something was wrong. The air felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. Then I saw it. Down the hallway, at the top of the stairs, stood a figure. A dark silhouette, tall and unmoving. It didn't have a face. It was just a shadow, a solid mass of blackness. I slammed my door shut and locked it, my entire body shaking. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I called my parents and begged them to come home early. I didn't tell them why, just that I wasn't feeling well. They got back that afternoon, and as soon as they stepped inside, I felt the atmosphere shift. The house felt lighter. The heaviness, the suffocating presence, it was gone. For weeks, I tried to convince myself I had imagined it all, that it was just paranoia from being home alone. But then, one night, as I was getting ready for bed, my mom stopped in my doorway. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, why?" She hesitated, then said, "You've been acting different since we got back, like something spooked you." I forced a smile. "Just weird dreams." She nodded but didn't look convinced. Then, just as she turned to leave, she stopped. "You know," she said slowly, "I didn't want to mention it, but when we got home that day, I found something strange." My stomach dropped. "What?" She frowned. "The closet door in our room was open, and I know for a fact we closed it before we left." A chill ran down my spine. Crud, I barely slept that night. Even now, years later, I still get that same uneasy feeling whenever I visit my parents' house. Like something is watching. Like something never left.
Story number 2.
I never believed in ghosts. That was something for horror movies and urban legends, the kind of thing kids whispered about at sleepovers. But what happened to me one winter night changed everything. It was December, just a few weeks before Christmas. I had just turned 19 and was home alone for the weekend while my parents went to visit my grandmother in another state. I wasn't worried about staying alone. Our house was in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and I had lived there my entire life without anything strange ever happening. The first sign that something was wrong happened just after midnight. I was in my room, lying in bed, watching videos on my phone with my headphones in when I heard it. A creak, soft but distinct. It came from downstairs. I pulled my headphones out and sat up, listening. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the heating system. I told myself the sound was just the house settling. That's what old houses did, right? They made noises. I put my headphones back in, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. Then 10 minutes later, another sound. A soft thud, like something heavy shifting. This time, I knew I wasn't imagining it. I muted my phone and listened, my pulse thudding in my ears. The sound had come from the living room, directly below my bedroom. I slid out of bed and crept toward my door. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the nightlight in the bathroom. I hesitated before stepping out, every nerve in my body on high alert. I made my way to the staircase and peered down. The living room was pitch black. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. I slowly descended the stairs, stepping lightly to avoid making noise. As I reached the bottom, I held my breath and scanned the room. The furniture was exactly as I had left it. Nothing was out of place. Then a sound came from the kitchen. A slow, deliberate, dragging noise. I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't a random house noise. It was something moving. I turned toward the kitchen, my hands trembling. The doorway loomed before me, a dark, yawning void. I reached for the light switch and flicked it on. Nothing. The kitchen was empty. The chairs were tucked under the table. The counters were clear. Everything was in its place. But the feeling didn't go away. That heavy, suffocating presence, like something unseen, was standing just inches away, watching. I backed out of the kitchen and hurried upstairs, shutting my bedroom door behind me. I locked it, climbed into bed, and pulled the covers up to my chin. I told myself I was just being paranoid. I was alone. The doors were locked. But the house didn't feel empty. And then, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it again. A whisper. It was so faint I thought I had imagined it. A soft, unintelligible murmur coming from the hallway. My skin crawled. I turned my head slowly toward the door. My room was silent, the shadows stretching long in the dim light of my bedside lamp. But the whispering didn't stop. It got louder. Not just one voice. Several. A chorus of murmurs layered over each other just outside my bedroom door. I sat up, my entire body tense. My mouth was dry. My hands gripped the blanket so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Then, my doorknob turned. I choked on a gasp. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't the house shifting. Something was trying to open my door. The knob twisted again, harder this time, the metal rattling in the silence. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then, tap, tap, tap. Soft, deliberate knocks against the wood. I squeezed my eyes shut, my entire body frozen in fear. The whispers grew louder, overlapping in a tangled mess of voices I couldn't understand. It felt like they were inside my head, circling me, pressing in. Then, as suddenly as it had started, silence. The whispers stopped. The doorknob stilled. I stayed frozen, straining to hear any sign of movement. Then I smelled it. A foul, rotting stench seeped into the room, thick and suffocating. It smelled like decay, like something dead had crawled into my house and was lurking just on the other side of the door. I clamped a hand over my mouth to keep from gagging, scratching. A slow, methodical scrape of nails against the wood of my door. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I was paralyzed. Then, just as quickly as it had started, It stopped. The air felt lighter. The suffocating pressure lifted. I don't know how long I sat there, too afraid to move. But eventually exhaustion took over, and somehow I drifted into a restless sleep. I woke up to sunlight streaming through my window. For a moment, I thought maybe I had dreamt the entire thing. But then I saw it. Long, deep in the wood of my bedroom door. They hadn't been there before. Something had been in my house. I spent the rest of the day at a friend's house, too terrified to stay alone. When my parents got home, I told them everything. They didn't believe me. My dad said the scratches were probably from me bumping something against the door. My mom said I had a nightmare, but I knew the truth. That house wasn't empty that night, and I was never alone.
Story number 3.
I never liked the basement. Even as a kid, something about it made my skin crawl. It wasn't the typical childhood fear of the dark. This was different. The air down there always felt too heavy, too still, as if something was lurking in the shadows just out of sight. My parents bought the house when I was 8, a nice 2-story home in a quiet Midwestern town. The basement was meant to be a storage space, unfinished with exposed pipes and a concrete floor. I hated going down there, but my mom always sent me to fetch things, holiday decorations, canned goods, old family keepsakes. The first time I really noticed something was wrong, I was 12. I had gone down to grab a box of winter clothes when I heard it breathing. At first, I thought it was my own, but when I held my breath, it continued. Slow, raspy, coming from the farthest corner of the basement. I bolted up the stairs so fast I tripped, scraping my knees. My parents dismissed it, said it was the old pipes making noises. I tried to believe them. But after that, the basement never felt the same. Years passed, and I did everything I could to avoid it. If I had to go down there, I'd turn on every light and grab what I needed as quickly as possible. I never looked toward that dark corner. I never stayed longer than necessary. Then, last winter, my parents left for the weekend to visit friends out of town. I was 19, old enough to stay home alone. That first night, I was sitting in the living room, watching a movie, when the basement door creaked open. I froze. It had never done that before. A chill ran down my spine as I stared at the dark opening. The air that drifted up was freezing, much colder than the rest of the house. Telling myself it was just a draft, I got up and shut the door. I even locked it for good measure. I went back to the couch, trying to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. Then, an hour later, I heard it. A single, deliberate from the basement door. I jumped, my heart pounding. I stared at the door, waiting, barely breathing. Another knock. Slow, methodical. I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking, and turned on the flashlight. The door remained shut, the lock still in place. Then the doorknob twisted. I let out a strangled gasp and stumbled backward. It twisted again, once, twice, as if someone was trying to open it. And then a voice, soft, almost a whisper, from the other side of the door. Let me out. My blood ran cold. It wasn't my parents. It wasn't a burglar. It was something else. I backed away, my mind racing. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. Then, bang! The door shook, as if something had thrown itself against it. I turned and sprinted upstairs, locking myself in my room. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed, clutching my phone, listening. I heard the knocking at random intervals. Once, twice, then silence. By morning, I convinced myself it had been a nightmare. Lack of sleep, paranoia. I went downstairs, hesitating at the basement door. It was still locked. Maybe I had imagined the voice. Maybe. That night, everything got worse. I was in my room scrolling through my phone when I heard something moving downstairs. It sounded like footsteps, slow and heavy. I held my breath, listening. Then the basement door slammed open. I heard the creak of the stairs, something ascending from the basement. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. I could only sit there staring at my bedroom door, my heart pounding. Then the footsteps reached the second floor. They were slow, deliberate, coming toward my room. The floorboards groaned under the weight of whatever was out there. Closer, closer. I grabbed my phone and called my mom, barely able to whisper, "Someone's in the house." The footsteps stopped. Dead silence. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. Then, my door handle turned. I screamed. The footsteps ran, not away, toward my door. I leapt out of bed and shoved my dresser in front of the door, my heart hammering. I pressed my back against the wall, shaking, waiting. Nothing, just silence. My mom answered, panicked. I could barely get the words out, but she called the police. I didn't move from that corner of the room until I heard the sirens. When the police arrived, the house was empty. The basement door was wide open. Nothing was stolen. No signs of forced entry. But the officers were disturbed by one thing. On the basement wall, written in black, greasy smears, were the words, "Let me out." I left that night and never stayed in that house alone again. My parents had the basement sealed off a few months later. They claimed it was because of structural issues, but I knew the truth. Something lived down there, and it wanted out.
Story number 4.
I never should have taken the shortcut through Blackwood Hollow. I had driven that road 100 times before, but never at night. It was an old, winding path that cut through a dense forest on the outskirts of town. The locals had stories about it. Whispers of strange figures in the trees, voices calling your name from the darkness. I never paid much attention, until the night I found out the stories were true. It was late, around midnight. I had just finished a shift at the diner where I worked and was exhausted. The main highway was closed for construction, so I had no choice but to take Blackwood Hollow. The road was deserted, nothing but my headlights cutting through the thick fog that had rolled in. The trees loomed on either side of me, their bare branches like skeletal hands stretching toward the sky. I turned up the radio to drown out the eerie silence, but the further I drove, the more uneasy I felt. Then, in the distance, I saw something in the road. A woman. She stood in the center of the lane, motionless. Her long hair hung in tangled strands over her face, and she wore a thin white dress that clung to her body as if it were wet. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Just stood there, her head tilted slightly like she was listening. I rolled down my window just a crack. "Ma'am, are you okay?" No response. I felt a deep, primal fear settle in my gut. Something was wrong. I inched my foot off the brake, ready to drive around her when she lifted her head. Her face was wrong. Her eyes were hollow, empty sockets of pure darkness. Her mouth stretched too wide, the corners splitting into something inhuman. Then she screamed. Not a human scream, something guttural, layered like a chorus of voices screaming at once. My instincts took over. I stomped on the gas, swerving around her. My tires screeched as I sped down the road, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I glanced in the rearview mirror. She was gone. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept driving, refusing to slow down. Then tap, 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 a sound against my passenger side window. I did not look. I focused on the road, my breathing ragged, my entire body shaking. Tap, tap, tap. The tapping turned into scratching, nails dragging against the glass. I finally glanced, just for a second. She was outside my window, her face pressed against the glass, grinning. I screamed and swerved violently, nearly losing control of the car. Then, she was gone. The road ahead was empty. The fog had cleared. I drove home at full speed, parked in my driveway, and ran inside, locking every door and window. I sat on my bed, shaking, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Stress, exhaustion, a trick of the fog. Then, my phone buzzed, a text message from an unknown number, 3 words, "Let me in." My stomach dropped, my bedroom door was open. I had closed it, I had locked it, and then I heard it, a whisper, right behind me. "Let me in."
Story number 5.
I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood where nothing ever happened. The kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, kids rode their bikes until sunset, and the biggest scandal was Mrs. Thompson's cat going missing for a week. But then the knocking started. It was late October, just as the air was beginning to turn crisp. I was 17 and home alone for the weekend while my parents went to visit my aunt. I wasn't nervous about staying alone. I had done it before, but this time felt different. The first knock came around 11 p.m. I was in my room, lying in bed with my headphones in, when I heard it. 3 slow, deliberate knocks on the front door. Knock, knock, knock. I frowned, pulling my headphones out. Who the hell would be knocking this late? I checked my phone. No missed calls, no texts. If it were a friend, they would have let me know they were coming over. I hesitated before getting up and creeping toward the window. My bedroom overlooked the front yard, and from there I had a perfect view of the porch. But there was no one there. A shiver ran down my spine. I waited a few minutes, watching, expecting someone to step out of the shadows, but nothing. Maybe it was kids playing a prank. Maybe I had imagined it. I locked the front door, double-checking it, and went back to my room. But just as I settled into bed, knock, knock, knock. This time, it came from the back door. A cold wave of dread rolled over me. No one should be in the backyard. The fence was locked. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I crept toward the back window, peering through the blinds. The porch light flickered weakly, casting a dim glow over the yard. The trees swayed in the breeze, their shadows stretching across the grass. But there was no one there. I grabbed my phone and texted my parents. Me. Hey, I think someone's messing with the house. I keep hearing knocking. A few minutes passed. Then, what do you mean? Like someone at the door? Me. Yeah, but I don't see anyone. Don't open the door. Call the police if it happens again. I swallowed hard. I didn't want to overreact, but something about this felt wrong. Then, knock, knock, knock. This time, it came from inside the house. My entire body went rigid. It was coming from the basement door. I turned slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The basement door was at the end of the hallway, slightly ajar. My parents always kept it closed. The knocking continued, louder this time. Knock, knock, knock. Something was in the basement. I backed away, every instinct screaming at me to get out of the house, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, frozen, staring at the dark gap between the door and the frame. Then the doorknob twisted. I gasped, stumbling back, my hands shaking as I fumbled for my phone. I tried to dial 911, but my fingers were slick with sweat, trembling too much to hit the buttons properly. Then the door creaked open. I saw it, just for a split second. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. It was watching me. I didn't think. I turned and ran. I sprinted to the front door, yanking it open so hard I nearly ripped it off the hinges. I ran outside into the cold night, not stopping until I was in the middle of the street. I turned back, expecting to see something in the doorway. But the house was silent. Still, the front door hung open, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I called the police. When they arrived, they searched the house from top to bottom. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints, no evidence that anyone had been there at all. But they did find something strange. The basement door was wide open, and at the bottom of the stairs, written into the concrete floor, was a message, 4 words carved deep into the stone. I knocked. You answered. I never stayed home alone again.
Story number 6.
I was 9 years old the first time I saw the thing in the closet. I don't remember when I first started feeling uneasy in my childhood bedroom, but I know it had something to do with that closet. It was one of those old wooden ones with a sliding door that always stuck halfway. At night, I swore I could hear faint noises coming from inside, soft shuffling like something moving. My parents told me it was just the house settling. I tried to believe them. Then, one night, I woke up to the sound of the closet door creaking open. The room was dark, except for the faint glow of my nightlight. I held my breath, staring at the sliver of blackness where the door had slid open an inch. Then I saw it. A single, pale hand reached out from the darkness, its fingers impossibly long, stretching toward me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I just lay there, paralyzed, watching as the hand slowly retreated back into the closet. The door slid shut. I stayed awake until morning, too terrified to move. When I told my parents, they dismissed it as a nightmare. Closets can't open by themselves, my dad said. It was probably just a draft. But I knew what I saw. After that night, I started keeping my closet door locked. For years, nothing happened. I convinced myself that I had imagined the hand, that it really was just a nightmare. Then, when I was 16, the lock broke. I had come home late from a friend's house. My parents were out of town, so the house was empty. It was around 2 a.m. when I crawled into bed, exhausted. I barely had time to pull the covers over me before I heard it. The closet door slid open. My blood ran ice cold. I turned my head slowly, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would explode. The door was open a few inches, just like before, and then I heard breathing. Slow, deep, ragged. It was coming from inside the closet. I bolted upright, reaching for my phone. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Then the whispering started. Soft, unintelligible murmurs layered over each other like voices talking all at once. I grabbed the lamp on my nightstand and threw it at the closet. The bulb shattered, casting sharp flashes of light across the room. The whispering stopped. The room was silent. I forced myself out of bed, my legs weak. I ran to the closet and yanked the door fully open. Nothing. Just darkness. just clothes hanging limply from their hangers, just an empty closet. But I knew better. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I nailed the closet door shut. For years, nothing happened. Then, last month, my parents decided to renovate my old bedroom. I had already moved out, so I wasn't there when the contractors started working. But I got a call from my dad. His voice was strange, shaken. "Son," he said slowly, we found something." My stomach clenched. "What?" He hesitated. "It was behind the closet wall." My hands started sweating. What was? Another pause. Then a hidden space, like a small room, maybe a crawl space. I felt sick. "We found scratches on the walls inside," my dad continued. "Deep ones, like someone had been trying to claw their way out." My mouth went dry. "But that's not the weirdest part," my dad added. I didn't want to know, but I had to ask. "What?" His voice dropped to almost a whisper. "There was a mattress inside, and a notebook." A cold wave of fear crashed over me. I swallowed. What was in the notebook? More silence. Then my dad exhaled sharply. Just one sentence, written over and over. My fingers tightened around my phone. It said, "I hear you breathing." I moved out of state the next week. I haven't been back home since.
Story number 7.
I never liked babysitting for the Millers. It wasn't the kids. They were sweet. It was their house. Something about it always felt wrong. Maybe it was the way the hallways stretched too long at night, or the way the old wooden floors creaked, even when no one was walking on them. Or maybe it was the locked door at the end of the second-floor hallway, the one I was never allowed to open. I never questioned it, at least not until the night I made a terrible mistake. It was a Saturday night, around 10 p.m. The Millers had left for an anniversary dinner, and I had just put the kids, Lily and Max, to bed. The house was finally quiet. I curled up on the couch, flipping through TV channels. The baby monitor sat on the coffee table, humming softly. Then, static. I frowned, glancing at the monitor screen. The feed had been perfectly clear just a second ago. Now it was nothing but white noise. I adjusted the volume. Through the static, I thought I heard something. Whispering. A chill crawled up my spine. I leaned closer. The whispering grew louder. It wasn't coming from Lily or Max's room. It was coming from the other room. The locked one. My stomach clenched. Maybe it was just interference. A radio signal crossing with the baby monitor. Then, a soft knock. I nearly dropped the monitor. The knock had come from upstairs. I turned off the TV, straining to hear. Silence. I told myself it was just the house settling, but my gut told me something else. I grabbed my phone and stood, creeping toward the staircase. My footsteps felt too loud in the quiet house. As I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. The hallway was dark, but I could see it, the locked door. And then I saw the doorknob turn. I froze. The knob rattled, as if something was trying to open it from the inside. I backed up, my pulse pounding in my ears. Then Max screamed. I spun around and ran to his room, throwing open the door. He was sitting up in bed, trembling, his wide eyes locked on the closet. "There was someone in there," he whispered. My stomach dropped. "Max." I saw him. His voice was barely audible. He was smiling. I turned slowly, my breath caught in my throat. The closet door was slightly ajar. I reached for the light switch, flicking it on. The closet was empty, just toys, clothes, and darkness. I forced a smile. "It's just shadows, buddy. You're safe." Max didn't look convinced, but he nodded. I tucked him back in, glancing at Lily, who was still asleep in her bed across the room. As I turned off the light, I heard him whisper, "He's still here." I left Max's door slightly open and stepped back into the hallway. My heart was still hammering. Then I noticed something. The locked door was open, just an inch. Nope. I was done. I grabbed my phone to call the Millers, then stopped. The baby monitor was still on the coffee table downstairs. The static had returned, but this time there was breathing. Slow, raspy, right into the microphone. A voice whispered, "I see you." I turned and ran downstairs. I sat on the couch, staring at the baby monitor, my hands trembling. The screen was still static. Then slowly the static cleared. I sucked in a sharp breath. The feed wasn't showing Lily or Max's room anymore. It was showing the hallway. The camera had somehow shifted. Now it was pointed directly at the locked door, and it was wide open. Something stepped into view. Tall, thin, its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its mouth stretched into a horrible grin. It was watching me. The screen flickered, and then the TV turned on by itself. Static, just like the monitor. Then knocking. Not from the front door, not from the back door, from the living window. I turned, my breath caught in my throat. A hand, pale, bony, was pressed against the glass. Fingers too long, stretching, clawing, and a face, grinning, eyes black holes, watching me from the other side. The knocking turned into pounding. I grabbed my phone and dialed the Millers, my voice barely working. "Someone's in the house," I whispered. Silence. Then a voice, distorted, layered with static. "No, I'm not." The call dropped. I don't remember running. I don't remember grabbing my keys or throwing open the door. All I remember is sprinting to my car, my vision blurred with terror. As I backed out of the driveway, I glanced at the house one last time. The figure stood in the second-floor window, watching me, still smiling. I never went back. The Millers moved out 6 months later. They never told me why. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about that house. I dream about the locked door, and I always wake up to the sound of knocking.
Story number 8.
I inherited my grandmother's house when she passed away last winter. It was an old Victorian home on the edge of a small town, the kind of place that looked it had secrets. Growing up, I only visited a handful of times, and I never liked it. The house was too quiet, the hallways too dark, and the attic always locked. My grandmother never let anyone inside. She never spoke about it. The one time I asked her what was up there, she grabbed my wrist hard and whispered, "Never open that door, never let it out." I was 5 years old then. I never forgot the way she said it. The house had been empty for months when I moved in. It smelled of dust and age, the air thick with something I couldn't quite place. I spent the first few days cleaning, sorting through old belongings, getting used to the strange silence. At night, the house settled, the walls creaking, floors groaning. It felt uneasy, but the attic door remained locked. I didn't have a key. I should have left it alone. The first night I heard scratching, I convinced myself it was just rats. It started around 2 a.m., a soft, persistent sound coming from the attic door. I sat up in bed listening. The noise was slow, deliberate, as if something was dragging its nails across the wood. I tried to ignore it. Then, a whisper. Faint. Almost too quiet to hear. Right outside my bedroom door. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The house was empty. I was alone. Then, 3 knocks. Slow. Heavy. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, my heart pounding as I crept toward the bedroom door. I pressed my ear against the wood, barely breathing. Silence. I opened the door just a crack. The attic door was wide open. Hash. I don't remember running. I don't remember grabbing my keys or getting into my car. But somehow I ended up in a gas station parking lot with hands shaking on the steering wheel. I stayed there until sunrise. I told myself I must have left the attic door unlocked. That maybe the draft pushed it open. But I knew that wasn't true. Because when I left the house, I saw something standing at the top of the attic stairs, watching me. I should have left, but the next day I went back. I had to know. I stood at the base of the attic stairs, staring into the blackness above. The air smelled different up here, rotting wood and something else, something sour. I stepped inside. The attic was empty, just a few old trunks, some broken furniture, but in the center of the room, a chair, old, wooden, and something was sitting in it. I didn't see it at first. It was a shadow within the shadows, a shape that didn't belong. Then it moved. Bones cracked. Joints twisted as it stood. A man, but not. Too tall, too thin. Its arms hung at its sides, fingers too long, curled like claws. Its head tilted toward me, and I saw its face. Or rather, the lack of one. Where its eyes should have been, there were only black holes. Its mouth stretched into something that wasn't a smile. It knew me. I felt it before I heard it. A voice inside my head. "You let me out." I ran. I flew down the attic stairs, heart hammering, feet barely touching the ground. As I reached the front door, I felt the air shift. It was behind me. "You let me out." I slammed the door behind me and never went back. The house still stands, but it's different now. The lights flicker at night, the attic window always open. And sometimes, just before sunrise, people say they hear a voice, knocking, laughing, asking to be let in.
Story number 9.
I never believed in ghosts. Not until the night I spent in my childhood home for the last time. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, in an old house my parents bought cheap because of its history. They never told me the details, only that it had been vacant for years before we moved in. I was too young to care. To me, it was just home. But something was wrong with that house. I always felt watched. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, certain someone was standing in the corner of my room. I'd hear footsteps in the hallway when everyone else was asleep. My mom blamed it on the old pipes, the house settling. I tried to believe her. Then, when I was 8 years old, I saw her. It was late. I had woken up thirsty and crept downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dark except for the dim glow from the kitchen nightlight. That's when I heard whispering. Soft. Urgent. Coming from the basement door. I stopped. The basement was always locked. My parents said it was unsafe, that there was a weak foundation, but I had always felt there was another reason they didn't want me down there. I turned, my little heart pounding. The whispering continued, low voices speaking in a language I didn't understand. Then, the door handle turned. I ran. I tore up the stairs, slamming my bedroom door behind me. I crawled under the covers, shaking. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I told my mom. She got very quiet. Then she knelt in front of me, her hands gripping my arms. Never go near that door, she whispered. Never. No matter what you hear. I nodded, afraid to ask why. That was the last time we spoke about it. Years passed. We moved when I was 15. My parents refused to explain why, only that we needed to leave immediately. I didn't argue. I was relieved. We never talked about the house again, until last year. My parents died in a car accident, and I was their only child. When I went through their belongings, I found the deed to the old house. It was still in their name, and it was still vacant. I don't know why I went back. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that it was all in my head. So I booked a flight, rented a car, and drove to my childhood home. I planned to spend one night there. I never should have gone inside. The house smelled of dust and decay. The furniture was covered in white sheets, the air stale. It felt dead. I walked through the rooms, memories pressing in on me, my old bedroom, the living room where we watched movies, the hallway that always felt too dark. Then I reached the basement door. It was still locked. My skin prickled. I turned away, then froze. There were scratches on the wood, deep, jagged marks, as if something had tried to claw its way out. My stomach churned. I should have left right then, but I didn't. I found the spare keys in the kitchen, my hands trembling as I sifted through them. And then I unlocked the basement door. The air changed the second I stepped onto the first stair. It was too cold, too still. The basement smelled damp like earth and something rotting. My phone flashlight barely cut through the darkness as I descended. The space was empty except for the chair in the center of the room and the mirror. It was massive, stretching from floor to ceiling. The glass was warped, stained with something dark. As I stepped closer, my reflection flickered. I stopped breathing. Then she appeared. The girl I had seen when I was 8 years old. She stood in the mirror, pale and thin, her long hair hanging over half her face. Her arms were covered in scratches. Her fingers bent wrong. I turned, my flashlight shaking. There was no one behind me. I looked back at the mirror. She was smiling. And then she moved. Her reflection took a step forward, out of sync with me. I stumbled back. She took another step. Then her lips parted and I heard her whisper, "Let me out." The lights exploded. I ran. I bolted up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut, twisting the lock. A thud hit the wood from the other side. Then another. Then deep, slow, and a voice. I left that night. I never went back. But sometimes late at night, I dream about that house. I dream about the basement door. And when I wake up, I swear I hear scratching at my bedroom door.
Story number 10.
I always hated the woods behind my house. As a kid, I wasn't allowed to play back there. My parents said it was too dangerous, too many wild animals, too easy to get lost. But that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was the whistling. It started every night around 3 a.m. Soft, distant at first, like someone whistling a tune just beyond the tree line. It was always the same melody, slow, lilting, wrong. My parents never acknowledged it. If I asked, they'd change the subject. I learned to stop bringing it up, but I never stopped hearing it. And I never forgot the night it got closer. I was 12 years old when I first saw it. It was a hot summer night, and I had left my window open to catch a breeze. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding, for no reason at all. Then I heard it, the whistling. Except this time, it wasn't coming from the woods. It was coming from the yard, right beneath my window. I sat up, my breath caught in my throat. The curtains fluttered slightly from the breeze. I reached out, hesitating, then slowly peeled them back. The moon cast long shadows across the grass. And that's when I saw it. A tall figure standing at the edge of the woods. Its arms were too long. its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its mouth was stretched into an impossible grin, and it was staring up at me. The whistling continued, low, broken, like something mimicking a song it didn't quite understand. I slammed the window shut and crawled under my blankets, heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, it was gone, but I knew it would come back. I started sleeping with my windows locked after that. For a while, nothing happened. The whistling returned to the woods, distant again like it had been before. I convinced myself it had been a dream, a trick of the moonlight, until my dog Buster went missing. We found him 3 days later, or what was left of him. His body was torn apart, bones scattered near the woods. But the worst part? His head was missing. My dad buried him without a word. That night, the whistling came back, louder, closer, and this time it didn't stop at the tree line. I woke up to the sound of scratching at my bedroom door. Soft, insistent. I sat up, every muscle in my body locked in fear. Then, a voice. Low, garbled. Let me in. I clapped a hand over my mouth to keep from screaming. The doorknob twisted. I bolted upright, running for my closet. I yanked the door shut behind me, curling into a ball in the darkness. Outside, the doorknob rattled harder. Then, silence. I waited, every second stretching into eternity. Then, footsteps, slow, dragging, moving away from my room, and then whistling from inside the house. I must have passed out at some point because the next thing I remember was waking up to sunlight filtering through my closet slats. The house was silent. I crept out cautiously, heart hammering. My bedroom door was wide open. The front door, unlocked. I never told my parents. I never slept without my closet light on again. And I never, ever went near the woods. I moved out years ago, left the town behind, started fresh in a city far away. I thought I was safe, but last night at 3 a.m. I woke up suddenly, heart pounding for no reason at all. Then I heard it, a whistle, outside my apartment window, and when I looked outside, I saw it, standing beneath the street lamp, smiling.